Welcome to ClickPoint, where we explore how this powerful combination transforms lives across industries like education, technology, venture capital, and sustainability. Today, we are speaking with Susan McPherson, who's the founder and CEO of McPherson Strategies. McPherson Strategies is a women-owned and led B Corp-certified boutique communications consultancy focused on the intersection between brands and social impact, providing storytelling, partnership creation, and visibility to corporations, NGOs, and social enterprises. A really interesting part of our conversation today is around the power of relationship building and running a business in virtual settings. Let's dig in. Susan, I cannot express how excited and flattered, mildly overwhelmed I am to the fact because I what I know of you and which to know even just a small part of you is to love so many things about you. And so I'm so flattered that you made time in your schedule to join me for this conversation.
I wouldn't have missed it for the world, Kwaku.
That is, I can't even say it enough. I'm gonna get really emotional. So I'm gonna hold myself back. I'm gonna dive in. I'm gonna hit you with a question right away, just to kick off our conversation. And I'm gonna start here. All right, you are known as a serial connector. Can you take us back to your early years and share the experiences that shaped your understanding of meaningful connections?
Absolutely. Well, I guess I will start with my parents because they, of course, had something to do with me ending up on this planet. And from a very, very, very early age, they exhibited the behavior of deeply, meaningfully connecting every single day. Literally Monday through Sunday, I guess, or whenever you have your week start, Sunday through Monday or whatever, Sunday through Saturday,
Sure.
excuse me.
Sure.
They would have the 5 local newspapers splayed out on the kitchen table, along with yesterday's or the day before's New York Times and Boston Globe, because both of those newspapers came via the mail.
Mm-hmm.
So they got there a couple of days late, and they would clip and cut articles that would make them think of friends, colleagues, relatives, long lost friends, and they would then go to their respective typewriters that with the clips, type up short little missives, fill the envelopes, and send them off into the mail. And I thought everybody's parents did that. And of course, that really wasn't the case. But the beautiful thing what that taught me all these years later was the intentionality of connecting. The time, the care. I mean, what they did every morning was very much time consuming, but it was also really thoughtful and it was also really kind. So that was embedded in me in a very, very early age. And years later, I mean, we're talking the early 70s. So years later, when I got my first fax machine, which was probably around 1989 or 90, I could do what they were doing, but what I thought was a lot faster or more efficient. Right. But of course, I never really figured out how to use a fax machine, so I don't know if they ever got there.
They were complicated. That's not just you.
Ridiculous. Not user-friendly at all.
No.
Oh, remember that paper, the scroll paper?
And the sound. Yes. Anyways, I'm sorry. I cut you off. Please continue.
No. But, I think now where connecting is so much easier. I think we have to delineate between meaningfully connecting and connecting, because you can zap somebody a DM, send a WhatsApp, and it's all so much quicker. But on the same token, I want to make sure we haven't lost that intent. My parents. But to answer your specific question about where did this come from in me, it was embedded at age 4 on, because you mirror what you're seeing your family do.
Oh, so you're raising a really interesting point here. So first of all, when I read that in your book, I was like, my dad he wouldn't do it religiously in the way that your parents would do it every morning, but my dad would do it where it's like, it was Sundays for him. Sundays, he'd read 3 papers. And I remember asking him, it's like, well, you're reading the same article over and over again. Why? And he's like, well, the truth lies in the similarities and the opinion is in the discrepancies.
What a
Like
cool dad.
I'm paraphrasing. I'm making him sound really poetic, but yeah, he is still a very cool dad. And so there was a level of that I saw as well. And when I hear your story, it makes me wonder about nature versus nurture in this scenario. And so I met you a little over a year ago. And when our mutual friend Christy introduced us, she was like, "Oh, you need to meet this woman. You are very similar to her." And so, if we were to stand next to each other, no one would actually look at the two of us and say that because you're way taller than I am. But
oh, honey, what drugs are you taking?
So I'm just going to keep moving. I live in the state of California. But the idea here is that I think that the similarity that she was talking about is, which I see a little bit in you, which I feel that I have, is this compulsiveness to make these connections with people. And so my question for you is, how much of that do you think was the nature of the environment that you were brought up in? Or nature versus nurture, or the nurturing version of that you saw your parents doing, or the nature, like the biological piece of that,
I think it was nature.
Okay. Because are your siblings the same way?
Nope. But I also, they're both very, very introverted. But one of the things too, I want to think about this, what nature versus nurture, because I was more outgoing to begin with. Mm-hmm. So I think I had a proclivity to mirror what they were doing. But it wasn't just the daily. I mean, it was the way my father was a professor for almost 39 years. And he taught at a women's college. And he performed every day. But and my mother worked for public television. But one of the things I think which was nature was all three of us are extremely inquisitive and curious.
Yeah.
And I think to be a good connector, you have to be curious. You have to be curious enough to pay attention when you're talking to people, to learn things about them that may not be on the surface, like, what somebody does for a living, or, right, the way they look, the way, what their favorite hobbies are. I mean, when you really want to connect and others, you have to get deeper. You have to go one layer below, find out kind of what is it that makes them tick.
Right.
Because if not, we would just be introducing people that were the same religion or the same color or, right, or the same profession
or the same height.
Yeah. Well, then I would have no friends because
Stop it.
I'd be taller than everyone.
Exactly. I'm joking. I'm a little bit taller than Susan, but her personality, you have a Shaq-sized personality. Know this. All right. So you mentioned the idea of just sort of liking things or sending people messages through LinkedIn, or maybe it's Blue Sky at this point instead of X or whatever. So I have this theory that you talked about something being lost and not actually being able to connect. And I think on a generational level, and this is not based upon any research or science, so it's the best kind of theory. It's like having all the best words. That I'm going to say you and I, within our generations, we had this experience of getting to know people beyond having their information readily available to us. Their likes, their dislikes, their parties. And so there was this skill that we had to develop of asking magic questions and sort of piecing together things. And the idea you're talking about, what is lost and just doing that. I guess the question would be, in your opinion, what is lost in just relying solely on those digital connections? And so this is a two-parter. And do you find, because I think both of us work with, people that are younger than us, that younger generations still have that ability to connect and ask questions in the way that you described?
Well, my first job out of second job out of college was working for USA Today as a researcher. So I had to really learn how to research. And at the time, I really had all I had was the Encyclopedia Britannica,
Right.
and the Yellow Pages, right? We
Right.
didn't have like the internet. We didn't have LinkedIn. We
Right.
didn't have, so I guess, that made our generation and older good at digging, like, and finding detail that now
Right.
is literally readily. So I don't want to think that new and younger generations don't have the means to find information. They're just the tools to do so are different.
Right.
Um, right. I mean, and yes, it's faster. I mean, now with AI and generative AI,
Yep.
you can be, everything is more efficient. But does that mean it's worse or less than? No, I think it's just different skills would
Yeah.
be my thought process there. But what I do think sometimes gets lost is because it's so easy, we just zap messages off into the ether without actually thinking about the ramification. So I
Say
do, and I'm not,
more. Say more
well,
about that.
I'm not a Luddite. I'm a huge believer in using whatever technology is at our disposal to
Yeah.
stay connected, reconnect, be in each other's like faces, for lack of better terms. But I do think because sometimes it's so easy, we either one don't do it because it's like, oh, I'll get to it later, right?
Right.
Because it's so easy, and then we never get to it, or because it doesn't really take much thinking. We we sometimes may say things that perhaps we don't want to say, right?
Mm.
Social sometimes put out things that may be less kind, that if we were actually sitting there at a typewriter thinking about our words.
Yeah.
I don't know. I hope I'm making sense.
No, that totally makes sense. And so there's two things it's making me think of. One, there's someone that I do some consulting work with. And he's a nonprofit leader, and I was meeting with him. We were having a strategy meeting this week, and he's like, "Yeah, I met these people, and then I just sent them a message." And I have and so like as we were having the meeting, I was breaking down for him. I was like, "Hey, next time you're going to do that, I want you to wait, because there's a power of that initial contact that you make with someone." And personally, I usually try to shift it to, "Hey, can we talk? Can we hop on a Zoom? Can we hop on a call?" There's so much in your book that I resonated with, the idea of not just connecting with people, but actually building relationships with people. And some of this comes from having meaningful conversation, but a lot of it comes from what you were talking about, curiosity.
Yeah.
And being able to just, tell me about your life, like genuinely being curious as to why someone is the way that they are. In whatever way, whether it's positive, negative, whether it's like someone who has different political views. I have friends like that, and I'm just like, well, tell me about it. Why are you so upset? Why do these things anger you so much? And so like what you're saying totally makes sense. Like to me, like that conversation with them, like, hey, you really need to think before you make that first contact. And how are you driving that? How are you using that initial way that you're communicating with someone to get to know them better?
Yeah. Yep. So it's building the reciprocity in it.
Exactly.
As well.
And avoiding that transactional sort of feel, which so many of us in any field feel like, oh, well, because those messages when you get them, where it's like, hey, I'm so-and-so. I was wondering if you could.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, oftentimes when I do talks, I take a poll at the beginning, and I say, how many of you receive a request to connect on LinkedIn? And
Right.
You sit there and you're like, should I, shouldn't I? And then you say, accept. And then literally within an hour, the person is selling you something.
Right.
And wouldn't it be amazing if instead they wrote you and said, Kwaku, I know you're starting a new business. I happen to know a bookkeeper that could be helpful for you. Or I happen to know somebody who will hire you. Or
right.
Here's a podcast about how to start a business.
Right.
And then the next day, then offer it. Right.
Right.
Like that to me. And it only takes a little bit of time to think about that in a way that leading with how you can be helpful with others. But it does take curiosity, because you have to do a little bit of research to find out what's going on in that person's life before you reach out to them.
So along those lines, because we're talking about the whole online piece, and you're gonna have to forgive me because I'm gonna ask you to expand upon things that are in your book because I think everyone should read your book, and I'm gonna push this even further as someone who's worked in education for this is the 25th year. I've either been at a school or around education. This skill of connecting with people, it's this major soft skill that is not understood, being taught. We're not creating opportunities for people to develop it in the same way and the natural opportunities for those. And this is me aging myself, having a house phone. Someone calls the house phone. There's a way that you answer the house phone in order to direct that call to anybody else in the house.
Oh my God.
I love my children. They've never lived with a house phone, so they don't know how to do that.
Yep. No.
Even that small act of, this is someone that I don't know. They're on the phone. How do I interact with them? Even if it's for just 5 minutes, it's such a minor thing, but these things are going away. So anyway, sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent. Can you talk?
Tangent.
It's just a little thing. These things, or just talking to people on the street, whatever it is. We don't do these things. Can you elaborate more on scrolling versus strolling in terms of relationship building and its impact on relationship building?
Well, now you're testing me because I wrote the book 3 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
You may have to edit this out, Kwaku. But I think it's around this whole issue of like quality versus quantity.
Yes.
And intentionality versus just, right? If I remember correctly. But
yeah.
I could be wrong.
No, so even, to be honest, even if you're just around the areas of that, can you talk or give some tips around that sort of like depth versus breadth sort of piece? Like, there are people who are just like, oh, well, I have 5,000 followers on this platform, but how many of them are wishing you happy birthday or know your mother's first name? Not that is like the medium for that, but can you talk about, because you seem to do both so well.
Okay, but I always want to make sure to level the playing field here. I don't have kids, I don't have a partner, and I don't have parents. So when people see how I'm able to spend time making introductions, making connections, I always want to just put that caveat out there because
sure.
I am very mindful that people who are taking care of maybe elderly parents or
right.
have young ones or have a partner who may be going through a challenging time. So I always want to say that because people are like, how do you do all that? I'm like, well, I have a little bit of extra time, not a ton. I run a company and I have employees, but still. So right. I do want to caveat that, but I do, quality over quantity in all parts of life is vitally important. And I don't think there's anything different in the world of connections because it's the quality relationships that you build through meaningful connections that actually power your life, whether it is your work life or your personal life. I mean, sometimes I'll do a show of hands, when you think of all the good things that have happened to you, how many of them did not happen because of a connection?
Yes.
But those ones, they could be random, but maybe you put some energy, you put some curiosity, you put some kindness in, and you turn that connection into something deeper, something that is reciprocal over time. So to me, look, there's 10 billion people or 9 billion people on this planet. You don't have to know all of them. You don't even have to get to know tiny minutia of them. But what you're missing by not getting deeper with people is a whole world of interesting, inviting, exciting extravaganzas that you wouldn't if you kept that door shut.
So, okay. Yes, and this is the problem with this. Everything you say, I'm just gonna be like, yeah, I agree with that. We're not really gonna argue. I'm just gonna point that out. All right, you run McPherson Strategies. You've been running it for about a decade at this point.
11 years.
Going on 12 years. And how long has your business been remote? Has it been since the pandemic, or were you doing it prior to the pandemic?
We've been remote since the beginning. Never had an office.
Okay. Now, I've been fortunate enough to meet some members of your team, to be able to gather in community with your team and other people in your community. And so, when I came to your event, you're walking into an event, you don't know who's who or who works for who. Like, there are name tags, but I you don't always, I couldn't look into the room and be like, oh, well, that's a McPherson person. That's a McPherson person. Maybe if I did that research, but I didn't. The level of intimacy and connection that you have with the people on your team makes it feel as if you've worked together, because I'm coming from the perspective of working in schools. And so like that level of connection that you have with people, whether it's like the amazingly cute thing that happens or the weirdly disgusting thing that might have happened one day that you got to both witness, or like the powerfully painful thing that happens. And this is all around context of kids. There's a shorthand. There is a level of respect and connection that you have with someone where you teach with them for a year. And it's even closer if you're on the same floor or in the same classroom, that sort of thing. Now, there are a lot of similarities between those environments that I've been in and the people who work with and for you. How do you foster that level of connection in a remote work environment?
Well, and I believe I started to share that I had founded the company when I was 48.
Mm-hmm.
So I had already had 30, years of professional experience of going to offices, having office mates and cube mates and all the things, and, having to smell somebody's tuna fish sandwich in the cube next to you. But I found that when you didn't see people as often, you actually got along better. And I think that's true for a lot of relationships. I mean, and again, I'm not married, so maybe I've got this all wrong. But I do think that there's something to be said about absence makes the heart grow fonder. But I also think it means being, and I hate to use this word again, but intentional about our communication, intentional about our getting together as often as we can when we can,
Mm-hmm.
and making it not necessarily about work, but making it about celebration. And the companies now absolutely dictating that their employees must come back to the office full time, I think are missing what the tea reads are telling us, that people are better when they come together around a celebration or around a specific project, or around coming up with new ideas, being creative thinking, but not day in, day out. And I think they're going to find that the productivity does not go up from what they've had with people being remote.
Yeah.
And from my experience, we've been very productive for the last 11 and a half years.
I mean,
and our teams are all over anyways, so we'd be meeting virtually with them.
Right. And it also, there's a whole piece of like, you're limiting who you can work with if they need to be within a whatever hour commute of you. I'm sorry. I felt like you had something else you wanted to share.
No, but I do think you do have to, the word over communicate, you have to get on the phone and call people, which I know sometimes folks are like, oh, but
right. That's not me, but other people are like that. You can't kick me off a call with you. That. So just to dig in a little bit deeper, besides like the phone call piece, what are the other things that you do to not only over communicate, but to effectively just maintain? And so I'm going to say this as a man of a certain age who's approaching his 50s. I'm noticing it is harder and harder to maintain some friendships, especially with other men. But in general, like, people get busy, like with the point you made before. It's like people have aging parents, they have young children, they have jobs that are stressful, different time zones. And so I find that I have to be really intentional to maintain specific relationships with people. What are some of the things that you do to maintain, I'm just going to call it this amazingly weird hybrid of professional and personal sort of connection that you have with the people that you work with?
Sure. Well, we have obviously the business tools,
right.
We use Zoom,
right.
Of course, we use Slack. We have monthly happy hours, and generally one person is responsible for whatever theme that is. And it could be from learning to plant gardens to, bringing in a guest speaker to talk about benefits of better sleep and how to sleep okay,
Wow.
to, a Halloween spooky, like, what is your favorite ghost story? So, just by doing that and showcasing the individual who comes up with the idea and celebrating that person, we are building deeper connections. Every Monday, we have our not annual, our weekly staff meeting, and we open it up with one thing somebody wants to share that they're really excited about or they're not excited about.
Yeah.
So again, professional, but also a little bit on the personal side.
Yeah.
Um, and then again, we get together 1 or 2 times a year for an annual retreat, which is all about fun. Absolutely no work, just fun. And it's a lot of fun. So just that alone, I mean, I wish we had if we weren't doing social impact communications, but actually doing just traditional communications, we might be able to do that more often.
Right.
But companies don't pay as much for impact as they do for traditional
The
marketing.
good work. They don't pay as much for the good work.
And then giving shout outs. We also have at the end of the weekly meeting shout outs for each other. And then our newsletter that goes out every other Friday, one person is in charge of that. So that person gets to put their own personal kind of stamp, for lack of better terms, on the newsletter so that everyone else gets to find out more about them that way too.
Yeah.
So all of this is just designed in a way that people know each other beyond the press releases they write or the blogs they post or, the social media content that they create.
Yeah.
Because they're all individuals and they all bring incredible ideas and backgrounds to the table.
And there's a piece here that you're describing, and I'm going to name it this way. I love the distributed leadership that you're sort of layering in there as well. And I'm sure you've had this too. Like I've worked in places where it's just like, there's the person up top and everybody just follows the lead of that person, whether they're right or wrong. And then afterwards, there's a meeting after the meeting, like, I can't believe we're doing this, but that's what this person says. So we have to do it. And then occasionally I've had these experiences where I worked at places where I've been challenged. Because when you were talking about the different ways, I was like, oh, I hope she mentions the newsletter. Because I can see, and I think even once you told me, it's like, oh yeah, even our intern, they're getting a shot at designing the newsletter, and they're the ones who are sort of creating the context or the lens through which McPherson Strategies is being shared out to people that week. And so so there's a level of that is powerful because it's sort of the amount that you trust the people that you are working with to be like, hey, my name, I'm putting quotes up there, but it is your name. My name is on this. And it is, I mean, a huge part of it is probably tied to your personal / professional network. And I trust you to represent us. So there's that. And then there's the challenge of, because if I'm that intern, I remember you saying this to me, I was like, oh my God, if I was that intern, I'd be nervous personally. If you're like, Kwaku, you're in charge of the newsletter, I'm like, oh, I don't want to screw this up.
Everybody supports. It's really magical to watch. And, every once in a while I'm like, we should do away with it because it's a lot of work and we can't charge anyone for it. But then I watch the output and we get commentary back from people like yourselves who find it really valuable. And it's also for our fellows. For instance, every fellow that works with us gets to do one newsletter, and it's something that they can then take into the world for their next role. And it's a great learning experience.
Even that. I called them an intern. You call them fellows. That level of empowerment,
when you're in communications, words matter.
No, I mean, let's be honest. They should matter all the time. Which is, I'm just going to say that they should just matter all the time. All right. Let me move on because I have you for like a short amount of time, and I could easily do this for 2 hours with you, but I'm not going to today. So with and you mentioned this earlier with AI and all these new digital tools, how do you see the future of relationship building sort of evolving, especially with younger people coming into the space? Especially we're talking about fellows and even the newsletter piece. There is the, I don't know, have you read the book Range? Oh,
No, should I?
oh, it's a fantastic book.
Okay.
And I'm going to go super high level. The book talks about the power of being a generalist over a specialist.
Ah,
And
yes.
there is a section in the book where they talk about productive struggle. And so the idea
Mm.
of, as you struggle through something, not only is the end product better, but your skill set rises.
Oh, wow.
You sort of improve, and a lot of that. And I'm not even sure if we've ever really talked about this, but I spent a large amount of time as a songwriter and as a touring musician. And so when I,
God,
you're amazing, Susan.
no, I've never done that.
Yeah,
I mean, God help anyone who had to listen to me sing.
I would feel the same way about someone reading a newsletter that I put together. So, to
I doubt
I
that. I doubt
I think we're both guilty of false modesty to an extent. I'm just going to say that. I'm going to name it that way. But to this idea of productive struggle, to me, that was always the art of writing songs. That would be, for every one song that was great, there was 7 attempts at something that wasn't great.
that.
I don't know if writing for you feels that way, but that was what songwriting felt like for me. And years later when I read this book, I was like, "Oh, this is why I got better." It was the productive struggle of going through
Mm,
that process of like, "Oh, in my head it sounded right, but then when I tried to record it, or even that phrase, I thought it was really witty, but when I hear it, it doesn't quite fit in this part of the song." So this is I'm asking like the longest question in the world, but giving a lot of context. So with younger generations, not that we're old, but I'm just saying younger generations, with younger generations that are coming up with different ways that they have formed relationships. Like, I have never had a fully online relationship with someone. I know
mhm.
I move as quickly as possible to go from the digital to something,
Yeah,
whether
yeah,
someone else called it the messy middle, where it's like, it's this, whether we're talking on the phone, we're talking online. So maybe we're not face to face because we can't be because of distance, but I'm trying to get there as quickly as possible where that person
right.
can tell me about them. With other people, and I'm going to say people who are younger than me, it's perfectly fine. I have a friend who refuses to talk to me on the phone. She will only text. Talking on the phone makes her feel nervous. She will only text me. And that to her is perfectly fine. And so I come to her.
Yeah.
How do you see this art of relationship building evolving? And you can speak at it, you can speak to it from the impact world, from the
No.
communications world, with younger people who have these different modalities of connecting with people,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
with AI and what you can do with that.
So I think all these new technologies are going to be integral, and they're going to continue to be like um, everywhere in our
Right.
lives. But meeting in person is still going to be number one.
Mm.
Even though we know young people are like talking on the phone or meeting in person, it's, pardon me, it's when shit gets done. It's when shit happens. And
Really?
that isn't going away. I as yes, obviously I built a company on being virtual, but when we are together, that is when the magic really happens. That is
Mm.
when the joy really happens. If we were together all the time, I bet it wouldn't be that
It
case.
would wane a
So
little.
yeah.
Yeah.
So to me, it's like when when you are getting together, that's when you have the difficult conversations, or you get together and that's when the magic is made and the joy happens. But that is never going to go away. I mean, God forbid we have another pandemic or some sort of physical happening that prevents us from getting together.
Yeah.
But I don't see the airlines going out of business anytime soon. I mean, I
Mm.
just saw a few of them that I was reading just last night, the billions they are taking in, not just from our passenger, like the actual flying, but like baggage,
Right.
fees and seat upgrades
Right.
and being able to like exit the plane first,
Right.
or all, so anyhow. But the point is people are doing that because they want to be somewhere with others, or maybe, I mean, I guess you could say they want to see the pyramids, but they
But
they want to meet
they
people
want to be in
along the way.
community.
Yeah.
They want to be in
Yes.
community. So, and this is a quick follow up. Do you find that the fellows, not the interns,
Yes.
But the fellows that you work with, and I met one of your fellows when I was last time I was in New York. Do you find that they sort of move towards this space that you're describing, where
Yes.
they see the benefits? And could you maybe even like share like a story around that, like, or like an example of how you how like proselytize is the wrong word, or even illuminate, but the idea of like how you were sharing with people, like, hey, look, the chats are great, the DMs are wonderful, but this is how we, and to quote you, get shit done.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
and how they're coming to that.
But again, they have the luxury of working for a company where they are virtual for most of the time.
Right.
So I'm not saying to the 22-year-old or 24-year-old or, whatever age you are at, graduating college or maybe even not going to college.
Right.
But I'm not saying you have to come and put your butt in a seat 5 days a week, Monday through Friday.
Right.
All right. If they can't show up and be actually in community with their colleagues a few times a year, then they shouldn't be in a communications world to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Because I've never had one of our fellows be like, "Oh, I don't want to meet in person." They're excited to meet in person. But now, if it was every day, they might be like, "Whoa, this isn't the world that I grew up with,"
Right.
right? Like,
Right.
isn't right. I mean, and many of the kids coming out of college today had 2 or 3 years of the pandemic,
Right. So
right?
that thirst to be in community,
Yeah, yeah.
that makes sense.
But
That makes
your kids
sense.
who are coming of age now, I mean, I would imagine with you and your wife, who are both outwardly focused, you're gregarious, you are curious. I can't imagine your kids are going to grow up in a world where they're going to want to just be in front of a computer all day, every
I
day.
hope not.
It's fine. No,
I hope
I
not.
just don't, because again, back to the beginning of our conversation, that nature versus nurture, I think it's a combination of that, and they also emulate what they see.
Yes. Okay. Okay. All right. I I'm just going to take a moment because that was really that really touched me in the way of think because I don't we don't think of our kids in that way or their futures because for better or for worse we're really focused on the present. Did you
Of
eat?
course you
Are you are you
did you
experience?
go?
Yeah, are you experiencing joy at points? You know what I mean? Are you making friends? You know what I mean? And so I always get a little wistful when I think about what the future versions of them will look like. And I don't. The thing that you really said that struck me was the idea of them seeing the what my wife and I put out in the world as part of a bit of a roadmap that pushed them in that direction, which is great because you don't think of you're like, no, we just got to work so that you guys can go to lessons and and experience joy and have bikes and that sort of thing. So thank you for that.
Welcome.
I know that we're at the end of our time. I have one last question
Yeah.
for you.
Yes.
So I'm just going to put it out there, then I can fully gush and say thank you for making time to join me today. What is the one thing that you wish everyone understood about the power of genuine connection in today's digital world?
Not to be redundant, but think about all the good things that have happened in your life. And I guarantee you that the vast majority of them happened because of a meaningful connection. So, why wouldn't you make it a priority when you look forward at making that part of your daily hygiene? You brush your teeth every day. Hopefully, you brush your hair every day.
Yeah.
Well, maybe reach out to one person and let them know you're thinking about them every day.
Wow. There.
Oh, you flattered
I'm
me.
not flattering you, and this is why I'm not flattering you because I know that there is at least I'm going to flatter myself and say, out of the 15 people listening, 12 of them, 12 of them are like, who did I reach out to today? You know what I mean?
But well, and with no agenda, just to let somebody know you're thinking about.
Which is that layered piece. Before I was talking about distributed leadership, what you're touching on there, which is so huge, is sort of talking about this epidemic of loneliness, and just subtly, not like, hey, it's your obligation, but something beautiful is going to happen through just connecting with someone or just reaching out to someone and being like, hey, how are you? I haven't spoken to you. I love that. I love that. Susan, I want to say thank you so much for joining me and all 15 of us. I'm joking. There's a solid 30 people that will listen to this episode. Thank you for sharing your time, your experience, your wisdom, and all of the nuggets. It's always gold. I appreciate you so much, not just the work that you do, but just you as a person.
I love that. And you are a doll, and I am so glad you are a meaningfully deep connection to me and that I'm in your orbit.
I feel the same way. And it happened in person. Just saying. Just saying. On that note, for those of you who are listening, thank you so much. Please check out another episode. Do all the things with the smashing of the like buttons. I don't really care. But the bigger, actually, I should care. I do care. Do that thing. But I'm going to leave with this. The biggest thing you can do after you've listened to this episode is reach out to someone you haven't spoken to in a while. Preferably even call them. No pressure. But I'm just going to put that out there. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.